The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Kildee. National security expert Richard Clarke says Trump has no interest in any investigation into Russia. Professor Ron Formisano says America has moved from a plutocracy to a kleptocracy. And Bill Press talks with Michigan Congressman Dan Kildee about the Trump collusions. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Richard Clarke saw 9/11 coming, and now he says Trump seems to want Russia to keep interfering in other countries' elections. And we say hello to Richard A. Clarke, veteran of 30 years in national security and over a decade in the White House. He's now the CEO of a cybersecurity consulting firm. He's also the author of 8 books. The newest, with co-author R.P. Eddy, is called Warnings: Finding Cassandras to Stop Catastrophes. Richard Clarke, thank you so much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
No, it's great to be with you.
And nice to have you with us as well. You and co-author R.P. Eddy write about Cassandra events in your book. Of course, it's a reference to Greek mythology. Are we talking about things like 9/11, the Iraq War, the Great Recession?
All of those. Basically, Cassandra in Greek mythology was a woman who was cursed by the gods. She could see the future accurately, see disasters coming, but no one would believe her. And a Cassandra event, therefore, in our terminology, is an event where some expert, qualified expert, data-driven expert, saw a disaster coming, but was an outlier. Others didn't agree with her. And she predicted the event, and unfortunately, she was ignored, and the event happened.
Now, there have always been prophets of doom. So how does one know when a warning of impending disaster should be heeded?
Well, that's what the book is about. How do you tell the prophets of doom, as you say, from the Cassandras? How do you tell the prescient expert who sees something before the other experts do, sees it clearly, from people who just wake up in the middle of the night with a premonition? And the book tries to detail how you should go about doing that. Basically, though, the Cassandras that we found in our case studies, we did 7 case studies from the past and 7 case studies in the present day and future. The Cassandras we found were people who were internationally recognized experts and who were data-driven and who said to their colleagues, almost all of them said the exact same phrase, "I hope I'm wrong. I want to be wrong. Here's my data. Tell me what's wrong with my data." And no one would.
You know, our listeners may remember you from some of your outspoken views about the aftermath of 9/11 and the onset of the Iraq War. Were you a Cassandra, a prophet without honor in his own government?
Well, that's not for me to say. And the book is not about me. People have said that. I think there are many people before 9/11 who said something like that was going to happen. 9/11, I think, does qualify as a Cassandra event.
We're speaking with Richard Clarke, CEO of a cybersecurity firm. Of course, he's an expert in national security. He's spent over a decade in the White House, and he is the author of many books. The latest, with co-author R.P. Eddy, is called Warnings: Finding Cassandras to Stop Catastrophes. Russia. Is Russia's reemergence as a threat one of those Cassandra moments? Because, you know, Mitt Romney even said, right in 2012, when he labeled Russia as America's biggest national security danger, I mean, was that a Cassandra moment?
Well, perhaps. I think there were a number of people who made generalized statements that a resurgent Russia, revanchist Russia, could occur. and particularly as it gradually did occur, people who were just observing the phenomenon. I think the person who would qualify as a Cassandra, who we didn't put in the book because it was happening in real time as we were writing the book, with regard to Russia, is Christopher Steele, the British intelligence officer, who accurately predicted that the Russians would manipulate our election in order to elect Donald Trump. And he was ignored at the time.
And it continues to be ignored, it seems, at least from Donald Trump's administration.
Well, it's remarkable. You know, any other president, and I've worked for a lot of them, Republicans and Democrats, any other president would turn to key staff and say, give me a 10-point plan to stop the Russians from interfering again in the future. And that order has never been given. Trump doesn't seem to care if the Russians interfere in the future. Perhaps he wants them to. But there's nothing being done to stop them from manipulating the 2018 election for Congress or the 2020 election for president.
And you know what scares me about that too is that it's flat out denial that it has happened at all, and yet you've got some 17 different agencies, security related agencies, that are saying yes, in fact, it has happened, and now we just need to find the depth of it or whatever.
Well, he seems to be afraid that if he admits it happened, that somehow it taints his election. Somehow it means that he wasn't fairly elected. Whether or not that's true, there's a way for him to spin that. He could have said, look, I had nothing to do with this. I don't think it had any effect on the outcome of the election, but it's an outrage to have another country interfering in our democracy, and I'm going to investigate it. I'm going to find out what happened. I'm going to make sure it never happens again. Now, the only reason I can think of why he hasn't said that is he doesn't want it investigated, because there may, in fact, have been some collusion.
Mm-hmm. Now, as a national security expert, of course, do you think President Obama perhaps made the wrong decisions regarding Russian interference in our elections?
You know, it's so easy with hindsight, to criticize decisions people make in the White House as events are unfolding. And I don't know, I've asked myself, what more would I have suggested, given the facts that they had at the time, and given the fact that there was an ongoing presidential election in which the president had endorsed one of the candidates. I don't know what more I would have done. I think they warned that it was happening. They warned the states, electoral commissions. They had the intelligence agencies come out and say it was happening. They twice demarched the Russian government and told them to knock it off. I haven't heard anyone suggest specifically what should have been done more and when that should have been done.
Mm-hmm. And I read recently that the one thing that President Obama was afraid of was that it was almost like he was interfering in the election himself by trying to help out Hillary with this. That doesn't seem like a reasonable reason to not do something about it. Here you've got a foreign country like Russia that clearly is meddling electronically in our elections. I don't think it matters who the candidates are.
Sure,
you've got to do something about it.
But you said do something more about it. My question is, what more would you have done about it that he didn't already do?
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Was the election of Donald Trump one of these events, like Challenger, the near meltdown of the Japanese reactor, Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme that should have been foreseen and dealt with early?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It should have been foreseen. After all, the Russians have been interfering in democracies and democratic elections all over Europe and the former Soviet Union. We knew that they very much disliked Secretary Clinton. There was no reason to assume that they wouldn't get involved. And yet, like all the other Cassandra events, we didn't think about it in advance because it had never happened before. And this turns out to be the most powerful reason why decision makers don't act on Cassandra event warnings. It's because what is being warned about has never happened before.
Mm-hmm. Again, we're speaking with Richard Clarke, a veteran of 30 years in national security, over a decade in the White House, CEO of a cybersecurity consulting firm, and, of course, author of many books. The latest, with co-author R.P. Eddy, is called Warnings, Finding Cassandras to Stop Catastrophes. From a management perspective, isn't one of the problems facing decision makers the matter of having too much information rather than not enough?
Well, it's a matter of having information from the usual sources. And having information that is filtered by staffs. I was one of those staffs for 10 years in the White House, filtering information going to the president. But with Bill Clinton, every once in a while, he would call me with some information that he got from an external source. And sometimes it would be crazy, frankly, but sometimes it would be right on. And I would say to myself, damn it, I should have told him about that. I should have warned him about that. You need a curious mind in the office of the president. And in any organization, you need a leader that just doesn't take what comes into the inbox.
Are the security agencies completely hamstrung right now because of this president?
I don't think so. I think the FBI is demonstrating some independence. I think the CIA at the operational level, at the rank and file level, is pretty independent, even though it has a political former Republican congressman as its director. I haven't heard of any example yet where he is trying to shape the intelligence. NSA certainly is doing its thing without regard to political interference. So, no, not yet.
Okay. Richard Clarke, co-author with R.P. Eddy, his latest book, Warnings, Finding Cassandras to Stop Catastrophes, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Richard, we do appreciate your time with us today and look forward to having you back again with us soon.
Love to do it.
Thank you very much. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure,
I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Professor Ron Formisano wrote a book describing the plutocracy that runs America. Under Trump, he now says, it's a kleptocracy, government by thievery. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Where are Charlie and Dave, Mrs. Koch's two mischievous boys? The Koch brothers have stayed out of the national limelight recently, but they're still trying to supplant American democracy with their little laissez-fairyland plutocracy. In fact, in late June, they held a meeting of the Koch Boys Billionaires Club, gathering about 400 other uber-wealthy rascals to plot some political hijinks for next year's elections. The club meets every year at some luxury hideaway, and its attendees have to pay $100,000 each just to get in. But participants also are expected to give generously to the brothers' goal of spending $400 million to buy a slew of Congress critters, governors, and others in 2018. This year, the group gathered in Colorado Springs at the ultra-luxe Broadmoor Hotel and Resort, owned by the brothers' billionaire pal and right-wing co-conspirator Philip Anschutz. Among the recent political triumphs that these elites celebrated in the Broadmoor's posh ballroom was the defeat this year of the Colorado tax hike to fix the state's crumbling roads. After all, who needs adequate roads when you can arrive in private jets? This attitude of the Koch's privileged cohorts explains why the public is shut out of these candid sessions. A staffer for the Koch confab hailed such no-tax, no-roads policies as a renaissance of freedom. For the privileged, that is, freedom to prosper at the expense of everyone else. This is Jim Hightower saying, indeed, their agenda includes killing such working-class needs as minimum wage and Social Security, and privatizing everything from health care to public education. In fact, the ultimate intention of this self-absorbed cabal of spoiled plutocratic brats is nothing less than to abandon our nation's core democratic principle of we're all in this together. If they kill that uniting concept, they'll kill America itself.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Historian Ron Formisano says Trump has eliminated the middleman in the long history of political corruption and appointed officials who are themselves the thieves. And we say hello to Ron Formisano, William T. Bryan Chair of American History and Professor of History Emeritus at the University of Kentucky. He has written books on contemporary politics, including Plutocracy in America, How Increasing Inequality Destroys the Middle Class and Exploits the Poor. Ron Formisano, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It's my pleasure. I've been here before and happy to be back again.
And it's always nice to speak with you, yes. Among your areas of expertise is the history of populism in America. Since we last talked, we have seen the phenomena of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. Are either of them true populists?
Well, populism or politicians who present themselves as populists and who are described as such often present a mixed bag. I would say that Sanders is very much a populist, a progressive populist. And Trump campaigned as a reactionary populist who promised some elements of progressive policy on which he has since reneged. I do think that Sanders would have turned out to be somebody much more true to his compass readings and to his policy proposals. Whether he could have gotten them through this Congress or not is another question, but I do think he would have made an effort, and then he would have not reversed all of the policies dealing with the environment and Dodd-Frank and you name it, of the Obama era that Trump has set about doing. And so I would say that I would distinguish them as a progressive populist and a reactionary populist who had some elements of progressive proposals in his campaigning, but of which turned out to be smoke and mirrors and as close to BS as you could probably get.
And, you know, and your last book was about plutocracy, and it certainly seems that Trump fits right in with that, correct? I mean, policy seems driven by private profit.
Oh, my goodness. We are beyond plutocracy. We are into kleptocracy. We are into an oligarchic government of thieves That's what I mean by kleptocracy. We are mirroring Putin's Russia, and it's basically a government of thieves. It's really interesting what's going on. I saw a Naomi Klein interview right after the election, and she's always brilliant. And she made the point, almost humorous in a way, that his appointments have sort of eliminated the middleman and gone right to the people who will benefit from the policies they oversee. Must be hard on the lobbyists on K Street because it almost cuts them out to a certain degree. I'm kidding, of course. I think the lobbyists will have enormous power in writing whatever legislation comes out of this oligarchic kleptocracy. And my shameless commerce division wants me to put in a plug for my forthcoming book, which is titled American Oligarchy, The Permanent Political Class, and it's coming out with the University of Illinois in the fall, and we can talk a little bit more about that if you wish. But I do think, yes, it's very much plutocratic, but but we are really beyond that. When I say kleptocracy, I mean it.
It's scary to think that it would go beyond that, certainly. And when Trump said he didn't want any poor people running big cabinet departments, is he really speaking the truth on behalf of all presidents?
I'm not sure I understand that question. Putting Trump and speaking the truth in the same sentence is an oxymoron to begin with. So.
Fair enough.
I'm not sure. I think almost everything he said during the campaign now needs to be taken with a grain of salt. And I'm not sure that he ever. Well, let me say this about Trump and poor people. He has disdain for poor people. He has contempt for poor people. It's hard to see how a person with that kind of a mindset, who grew up privileged, arrogant, narcissistic, could have any empathy or understanding of the lives of poor people and could appreciate. Now, maybe he's thinking of Ben Carson's background, partly real, partly imaginary on Ben Carson's part, but who knows? I would just repeat that he has contempt for poor people. He doesn't understand them. He's incapable of empathy for poor people, so I think that should be just dismissed out of hand.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Ron Formisano, Bryan Chair of American History, Professor of History Emeritus at the University of Kentucky, and author of Plutocracy in America, How Increasing Inequality Destroys the Middle Class and Exploits the Poor. Now, Ron, I want to play devil's advocate here. Isn't there something to be said for successful capitalists using their business talents on behalf of government enterprises?
Yes, but the distinction needs to be made that in terms of a government enterprise, not to participate, they should not be, I would recommend that they not participate in a government enterprise, because then the line becomes blurred between their interest and the public interest. But if on behalf of government enterprises means saving the environment, and you have somebody like Tom Steyer, a venture capitalist who has supported both Democrats and Republicans who will vote for environment-friendly policies, sure, I think that's quite beneficial. And there are others like that. There are some very conservative, even reactionary capitalists who sort of step out of their ideology because of a certain cause that they're interested in. For example, marijuana. And Peter Singer. And Peter Singer, for example, who is incredibly reactionary and gives money to the likes of Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, and I think Trump, and also pushed very hard for charter schools in New York. Well, he has a gay son, so on LGBT questions, he tends to be liberal, and he tends to support government, state, and federal policies that tend to guarantee the civil rights and liberties of the LGBT people.
Mm-hmm. Now, how would you say a true populist president would be able to get things done? And have we ever really had one?
We've had episodes of populism in various phases of their regimes. Teddy Roosevelt sure acted as a populist. And Franklin Roosevelt, although he did not campaign as a populist, how could one imagine Franklin Roosevelt with his upper-class accent, his cigarette holder and his pince-nez, or what he wore at his general manner? How could anybody ever confuse him as a populist? And yet his policies were definitely populist, and he had, because of the Great Depression, he had an overwhelmingly, especially in his first term, he had an overwhelmingly Democratic Congress. And Lyndon Johnson, certainly the same thing. He won a landslide victory in 1964. Many new members of Congress came in. They weren't embedded in the political culture. They weren't embedded in the political class, and they were able to break free and enact policies that I would say are populist. And I think across the board, and even Richard Nixon, who in the first couple of years of his presidency, unlike Republicans today, actually thought he had a responsibility to govern and to do something about, and he was the one who enacted minority set-asides. His program regarding federal contracts and certain number of minority businesses need to be excluded, all of which was reversed, by the way, by Reagan in the 1980s, whose Justice Department conducted an all-out war on some of the policies of some of Nixon and, of course, many of Johnson's in terms of civil rights, civil liberties, aid to minorities, aid to the poor, and aid to vulnerable people throughout society. So the answer to the brief answer to your question is, yes, we've had presidents who have campaigned as populists. Some have followed through, some have not. Some have responded to events while in office and promoted populist policies and had the votes in Congress to get them through.
Okay.
That was supposed to be a short answer.
But it was a very good answer, so regardless of length, I think that was great. Before we let you go, I want to talk a little bit about Mitch McConnell in your state of Kentucky. What's wrong with him? And I mean, is he a stooge for the far right or is simply playing his own game to stay in power?
As a little kid would say, do I have to? Do I have to talk about Mitch McConnell, the turtle man? I mean, really, I have to have him as my senator in Kentucky. Look, his recent autobiography said it all. He was extremely upfront about what he's all about, and that's the pursuit of power. That's about the pursuit of power, and that's what McConnell is all about. And he will do anything that preserves his position. He's a very wealthy man, and he associates with wealthy people. And again, he has a grip on Kentucky, and it's partly because the Democratic bench is fairly weak, and it's partly because during the Obama administration, many formerly Democratic voters turned into Republican voters, and that was especially true in eastern Kentucky. There was enormous animus against Obama, and it was partly based on race. It was partly based about remarks he made about rural Americans, and it was based partly on a false campaign that he and his policies alone were responsible for the decline of coal jobs. His Environmental Protection Agency regulations, yes, had an impact.
Okay. Ron Formisano, Bryan Chair of American History and Professor of History Emeritus at the University of Kentucky, author of the book Plutocracy in America, How Increasing Inequality Destroys the Middle Class and Exploits the Poor. Ron, as always, we appreciate your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org, and we look forward to having you back again soon.
It's my pleasure.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Michigan Congressman Dan Kildee about just how serious the Trump collusion with Russia really is.
It's dead serious. In fact, when I saw the email, I thought if somebody were to make it up and sort of oversimplify what it is that they were offering and put right in, this is part of the Russian government's effort to assist Trump. I mean, it's almost like they didn't have to say it, but they put it right there in black and white. It's real trouble. And of course, the problem, I think, for all of us is we have to just stop listening to what the Trump team says when they respond to these. Let's just let the investigations go forward, get the facts, knowing that every time something like this comes out, they're going to have some sort of answer that twists the facts or changes the facts or basically another obfuscation. And all they really care about is that it gets reported that way on Fox News, and that the 38% of the people right now who still think he's doing a great job, the 85 or 84% of Republicans who give him an approval rating, that they're going to give him, a green light to continue to do what they're doing.
Oh, they've lied about everything. They've lied about the fact that there were no meetings, and they're like, so, well, yeah, there was a meeting, but we didn't talk about politics. And, we did talk about politics, but we didn't know ahead of time what she was coming for. Then we see the emails, and we know that was a lie. I mean, it's just one after another. I mean, zero credibility.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, to use a Trumpian term.
All right, now
he's the one who invented the word, by the way.
That's right.
Sad.
It's a great word. It's
that.
a very good word. It's one of the best words.
Right.
And he invented it.
Right. Yeah, sad. There's a lot sad for sure. All right, so you've a successful candidate. You're running for office, and you get a call from Russia, or maybe it's Venezuela, or maybe it's Egypt. Right. I don't know. Our government has some really dirty stuff right on your opponent. We want to meet with you and dish all this dirt. What do?
You call the FBI. I mean, you do what Al Gore's campaign did in 2000. You call the FBI. You don't take it. I mean, it is so much a part of what anybody who's done this that I've ever been associated with. I've been in politics myself for 40 years. It's beyond comprehension that you would take that call or take that meeting.
I mean,
yeah. even if a person is not bound by any ethical constraints, the first thing you would think is someone is setting me up.
Just as a matter of self-preservation.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
It's beyond the pale.
Okay,
and they try to create all these false equivalencies. They are the best manufacturers of false equivalency that you've ever seen. Well, everybody does it. No, nobody does it.
Well, that's the thing. I talked about this yesterday. They moved the goalposts a little bit to like, oh, no. They were not trying to undermine America. They were specifically going after Hillary Clinton. For this to be treason or collusion or whatever, there would have to be a specific intent to destroy the electoral freedom that we have here in America, the whole process, which they just don't get. They just gloss right over. They say, no, but it was Hillary.
Yeah.
Which is silly.
So I want to give you another scenario.
Yeah.
So let's say you're running for office, and you're and before you were a very successful businessman, and you had a business partner in Moscow, and you tried to put up a hotel, didn't work. You had a big Miss Universe contest over there.
Except for the Miss Universe, you've actually described my career.
Good, right. But you've been very successful. So then your son now is running your campaign, and your son gets an email from your business partner, the guy that you tried to build this hotel with, and your business partner has found out some information about Hillary Clinton that he wants to get to your father, right? This email comes to your son, and your son says, "Oh, here's Daddy's business partner with this stuff. Yeah, of course I'm going to meet with this person he wants to meet with." So, do you tell your father about that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, of course.
Yeah.
The idea that they have created this firewall between father and son is just laughable. It's laughable. But, that they just believe that if they can say words in order, no matter what those words mean, no matter truth or false, they get to just say it, and that's it, and we're supposed to just accept it, and it's fake news if you disagree.
Right. So now the emails have set up the meeting on the 3rd of June. Donald Trump actually sews up enough delegates to win the nomination. He's not the nominee yet,
Right.
but officially, but he's got on the 6th of June. The meeting is going to take place on the 9th of June. On the 7th of June, the day after he sews up the delegates, Donald Trump gives a speech down in Florida where, do we have that, Jamie? Yeah. Where he makes a promise.
I am going to give a major speech on probably Monday of next week, and we're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very, very interesting.
Now, where'd that come from, right?
Prescient.
Yeah.
He just has an unbelievable and uncanny ability to predict the future of the next few years. Or they had a meeting with the Russians.
Yeah. Or he knew they were going to have a meeting with the Russians, and it was going to be a lot of hot stuff in there that he could throw out.
He can't have it both ways. He can't describe himself as a masterful hands-on manager of every detail of every organization that he's involved with. But then when it comes to any wrongdoing, that's the one time that I wasn't involved. The one time that I wasn't a part of the conversation is when we met with the Russians or whatever it might be.
How lucky is he, man? Just happens to keep his hands clean there.
So when you look at this, I mean, there is still the ongoing lawsuits over the emoluments clause, right? Blatant conflicts of interest there. There is still a special counsel investigating obstruction of justice, and now you have collusion,
right?
And I think the FBI and the Senate and House Intelligence Committees are looking into that. I mean, so emoluments clause, obstruction of justice, and collusion. Where does all this lead?
It's hard. This is one of those times where people ask me this all the time. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how this thing plays itself out, except that they're not going to change, and the facts are going to come out. I don't have any doubt about that the investigations in the House and the Senate, Mueller's investigation, they're going to be able to subpoena documents. They're going to be able to subpoena bank records, probably, almost certainly, the tax records of Donald Trump. All of this is going to come out, and the facts will speak for themselves. And we haven't seen a lot of it. The circumstantial case and the anecdotal data that we've seen, these emails, build a pretty strong argument that they, I don't know if it's to the level of criminal behavior, but they lie about everything they do. How it ends is really hard to say.
Yesterday, two of your colleagues, Congressman Brad Sherman from California and Al Green from Texas, introduced articles of impeachment. Are you on board?
I'm taking a different approach, to be honest with you. I think it's really important that we, as I said, let's let these investigations reveal the full story. Because we don't, if there is a cause for impeachment, and I don't know that there is, but if there is, it will be revealed. Like I said, these facts are going to come out. And this is more of a tactical question, I think, as Democrats. When there's chaos within the Republican Party and chaos in the White House, and they are essentially self-immolating without our help.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
This is happening. These are sort of unforced errors that they're doing. This is not because we're forcing them into this stuff.
Right.
My view is we have to focus on order, on chaos, and an agenda, and talking about the things that we will do when we are in charge to show the contrast between the chaos and the deception of this administration and what has now been a Republican Party that, for the most part, is wrapping its arms around this guy.
Yeah.
And the alternative, which is a party that's willing to advance an agenda that really affects the things that people think about every single day: putting their kids through college, having a decent retirement, having a decent home, living in a community that's safe, having wages that allow you to live a decent life. When I go home, people do talk about Trump and Russia, but mostly they're talking about the same things they were talking 2 or 3 years ago.
So let them self-destruct and Democrats do your job.
And I think getting ahead of that may actually be counterproductive
So
for the country.
what would it take for Republicans in Congress? When you talk to them, I'm sure, a lot of the time, what's it going to take for Republicans in Congress to say, all right, I had it, I can't support this guy anymore?
I think some of the Republicans that will be focused more on principle will come to that conclusion because they think it's right for the country. Maybe a bigger number will come to that conclusion when suddenly their interests are threatened by him. Right now, there's a lot of folks who are willing to go along with all this stuff if it leads to a big tax cut for the people at the top. I mean, let's be clear. Their agenda is not complicated. It's to cut taxes for the people at the top. That's what they're focused on. There's a lot of other stuff that they talk about. As long as Donald Trump is on board and they can hold together a majority, the one thing that we think, healthcare is going to be hard for them to thread the needle on. Anything really complex will be. Big tax cuts for the folks at the top is a broadly held view on the other side of the aisle. And as long as Donald Trump's on board and will sign the bill that they send them on that, they're going to hang with him.
He's the ticket to getting that.
Yep.
Yeah. Right.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible: Richard Clarke, Ron Formisano, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Kuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.